Hey everyone, welcome to Love Story. I am your host, Yandea, and joining us tonight is Khaliah. If you recalled, we had Khaliah on for our part one, so this is part two. If you haven't yet watched part one, please do, because her story, we just had to get it into two parts. Who knows, we may do three. We may have to
It's
do
big
three.
enough.
It's big enough. It's big enough. We may have to do three. So I know that she is up to coming on again and, just sharing and, it's part of her purpose, right? To share her story and
Absolutely.
to, shed light and all of that goodness. So definitely we may need to do a part three.
We
Okay.
can definitely do
So
a part three.
but we did promise that part two would be about Khaliah sharing her NDE experience, right? So this is all about what she experienced after going to the hospital. And I'm not going to spoil it. She's probably going to talk about it. And Khaliah, I'm just going to let you share. And then at the end, I'll probably have one or two questions for you. And then we'll do a part three.
Okay, sounds perfect. So again, my name is Khaliah Sage, and this journey started for me in January of 2014. So I'd been taking a medication for depression for 28 days. Everything was fine until it wasn't. And so I kind of talked about that before, but the reason I'm bringing it up to tell it now is that I had no idea that anything I was going through while I was in the near death experience, when I was in the coma, that it was directly related to the medication. So all I know is, 1 minute I'm in the hospital, they're telling me I have Stephen Johnson syndrome. And the next minute I'm just like in spirit form and I'm just sort of standing there looking at my body. And there was no sense of how much time had passed. Like it wasn't that I knew it was the next day or anything like that. It was just like, boom. I remember them saying, "You have Stephen Johnson syndrome." And I was like writing on this board and I'm like, who the F is Stephen Johnson? And next thing I know, I was sort of in this like spirit body space. And I want to preface that I didn't have language for this when I first experienced it. So this is 11 years after the fact of me putting it all together, but I will do my best to explain it how I experienced it just in that moment. And so the first thing I noticed was that I could look at myself. I had the out of body experience of seeing me laying in the hospital, and I could see what was going on in the hospital. I could see my family there. Um, but immediately, like before I could even get too comfortable in that space, there was like this, what I nicknamed a spirit body. It was like this really, really bright light, but it was sort of like in the shape of a human, but not like a human body. Like it didn't look like a human when I was looking at it, but I could talk to it and it was just sort of telepathic, but it was telling me like, I'm going to go with you through this journey. And so I'm like, oh my God, am I dead? What's going on? They're like, you're not dead and you're not going to die. And so I was a little perplexed by that because, again, I was taking the medication for depression. I was dealing with suicidal ideations. So I thought this was almost like punishment because I had, tried to hurt myself. But in actuality, like that really had not a lot to do with it in that moment. So I'm just sort of asking these questions, but I don't really know what to make of this at this point because all I know is that this, spirit body is here and it's telling me that I have to go through these different, parts of the journey. And so one of the first things I remember was going like to what appeared to be my past. Now, granted, I didn't know that this was the past. I just recognized it as somewhere that I used to live, but there wasn't like this huge, this is the past, like it wasn't that moment. But I ended up going back to a place that I used to live and having to see some really terrible shit, for lack of a better term. Some experiences that I had in childhood, I had to like watch it happen to somebody else. So in that point of the experience, I'm watching what happened to me happen to my friend. And they're telling me like I have to watch this and I can't like do anything. They were very clear that when I was in this past space that I could not touch anything, that I could not move anything. Like it was it had to be left untouched. That was like a huge thing. So they like, when I'm in this space, it kind of got scary, but then at the same time, it like wasn't, but I just didn't really know what was going on. So I was like panicked, but ended up having to see this experience from my past happen to somebody else was very, very distressing. Then it was like this whole play out of things happening in my family. And so then the next thing I remember was being at the hospital again. And I was able to like go back and check on my body. I was doing that a lot. I think in my like human form, I was kind of scared that I was going to die. Like I didn't really know. So I kept going back to the hospital to check on my body. And when I did, I could see like all the stuff that they were doing to me. And mind you, like I didn't know any of these medical instruments or these procedures or anything prior to this experience. So fast forward just to prove a point, when I woke up, I was able to recall all of these experiences and tell them like, yeah, you did this and you used these instruments that looked like this. And I was describing all of them, and I was describing hydrotherapy, which I'd never, come in contact with, but I was describing exactly what happened, and they were just like, oh my gosh. So back to the coma space. And for context, I was in this space for 37 days. And time in the spirit realm is not like time here. So even though this was 37 days of Earth time, I experienced so much stuff in that congealed amount of time. I don't know another way to say it, but it was just really, really, really condensed for that period of time. But I had no like recollection of time or anything. So then it was kind of this going back and forth in the hospital. Then there was experiences where I could visit people that were living. So I didn't see like, so my family, I didn't lose anyone at that point. I hadn't had a bunch of family members that were passed or anything, but there was a point that I could see ancestors, like people that had passed long before me, but I didn't get to like talk to them. It was more just like seeing them kind of in this passing. And for me, my experience was a lot of just seeing that things were there and not as much interacting with them. I think the point was for me to know and be exposed to, hey, this ancestral realm exists, this angel realm exists, this past realm, all of the things, it was all there. So I was able to see ancestors, but I didn't recognize them like with my human eyes. But I could just see that there was a lot of them. But one of the other experiences I had was my grandfather was actually in the hospital in real life at the time that I was in my coma. So I was able to go and talk to him, and he needed all this surgery and his gallbladder and all this stuff. Again, would not have any clue or idea of this, but was having a full blown conversation with him. Lo and behold, I wake up and I'm asking about, hey, did Papa get his, gallbladder removed? And they're just looking at me like, how do you know that? So I'm like, I went and talked to him, I was telling him all the things, and they're just looking at me like, So that was part of the experience. Another part of the experience, so this is where I was sort of like able to just be in the present life, but in my spirit body. So I was able to go and visit my grandfather. I was able to go and visit my best friend, who at the time she was pregnant, and she had just found out what she was having like right before I got sick. And so I literally went to her gender reveal party. And I vividly remember all of this, to the point that when I woke up again, my friend came to visit me in the hospital. I'm telling her, I saw you guys had this, you had this cake, you smushed it in your husband's face, and blah, 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 blah. It was a baseball. I'm telling her all the information that only you would know if you were at the party, and I was not wrong. So that was part of the experience. The other parts of the experience were trippy and hard to put into human words, because I was able to just, like I said, move through these different spaces without much anything more than a thought. Like I thought I would be going to like rooms and stuff. No, it was just like whisked away and boom, like I'm in a different space. So I was able to see angels, and I was very not confused, but I was surprised that they did not look like, the humans with the glow and the wings. Like they did not look like that at all. They looked like Transformers almost, is the only way I know how to describe it, but they just looked big and like kind of gaudy almost, but they weren't scary. And being in their presence was like calming. It wasn't scary at all. So there was all these things, and I'm asking this guide that's with me, I'm like, is this supposed to happen? Like, why am I seeing all of this? What am I supposed to do with this? And I didn't really understand, like, because I was just sort of moving through all these different things. And some of the stuff was like I said, it was parts of my past, and it was a lot of abusive stuff that I was having to like witness. And it was just like a lot. And then seeing the stuff that was happening in real life, and then the stuff that was happening in these other realms. And I'm passing by all of it. And so at another point, they're kind of like showing me this big, what looked like it was like all the planets were connected, and I could see like how everything is connected, and it was just like this one place or whatever. And so after I saw that was when I was just like, okay, what is the point of all of this? I'm ready to talk to God. Like, I want to speak to the manager because this is not making any sense to me, and I need to understand, like, I'm still stuck on my human stuff of like, why did all this bad stuff happen to me, and what's going on with that. So again, it was like in this instant, I'm just sort of in this space, and there's like all these stairs, and they're like huge. And they're telling me, like, the guide is like, okay, you can go see guide. And I'm just like, and they're telling me, like, I cannot get too close to it. Like, if I get too close to it, like, I'll start to dissipate, and I like won't be able to come back, but I have to come back. And so they were very, very clear about that. I know a lot of people have experiences where they're given a choice if they want to come back. I was not. They were very explicitly clear that I had to come back, that this was nothing more than me being able to ask questions, but I had to come back. I could not stay. And so immediately I'm just in this, like I said, there was like big stairs, but I'm just sort of like floating. And then when I get to the top, I'm expecting to see, white Jesus or a band and a big chair, like all this stuff. And it was not. It was literally like this huge open space. And there was this giant mirror that was just like so huge that it was bigger than the space that it was in, but it was still contained in the space that it was in. It was just like not mathematically possible that this could be this big in this space. Like, my human brain cannot make sense of this, but immediately I just feel this love, warmth, acceptance. Like, I immediately just start crying, and I don't have to use human words or human anything to talk to this. And it's like, in it, I can see everything that there ever was, everything that there is, everything that there will ever be. Like, it's all there, and I could see it. And it was like this prism kind of reflection, because like I could see the mirror was reflecting me, but then at the same time I could also see through it. And it was just this huge like source of everything, and I could just see everything came from this is connected to everything, everybody is connected to this. And so I'm just like overcome with emotion at this point. I can't even really, I came in there very like, I would ask all these questions, but at that point it was just so like physically overwhelming that all I could do was cry. And I just felt safe and accepted in a way that I've never felt anywhere in life. And I'm able to just, whatever my question is, whatever my concern is, if I bring it to my thought, it's immediately like shown to me, and I can see the who, what, where, when, why, like every part of the question I could just see like in that mirror, and I could just understand it. And so one of my biggest things was just like, where were you when all of this happened to me? Because I grew up, in a Christian home, and was very Christian when all of this stuff happened to me, which of course is why I was expecting white Jesus. And I really had a hard time understanding where God was in all of the painful, traumatic things that I had experienced. And it was very clear. It took me back to the thing that I had seen earlier when I had to watch what happened to me happen to my friend. But this time I could see that it was me, and it was physically like my child body in the mirror, and I could see. And it's showing me that, like, while this was happening, essentially my body was experiencing it, but my spirit was sort of detached from it. And it was essentially like holding this. And I could see that I had ancestors that were there, sort of holding me in that space. And this spirit was like holding me in that space so that basically I wouldn't absorb all of the pain. I wouldn't remember it. And so, but of course, my question is just like, but why couldn't you stop it? If you're this all powerful God, and why can't you do that? And it was, again, none of this is in English. So it was just showing me like this duality of light and dark, and it's all there and it's all connected. And so I could see that the people that were hurting me, they were kind of enveloped in this darkness, and the light was trying to like push this out kind of thing. And it was like creating this separation between me and them. And so basically the message was like, there is a separation of light and darkness, but light kind of pushes that out. So it was showing me like it was protecting me even in that moment, which, if I'm being completely transparent, that wasn't enough. Like at that point, I was just so like, I had so many questions, and this was still so raw, and everything was just like, what? It wasn't enough of an answer, but it was telling me that I would understand later. So then I could just see, like, again, anything that I brought to my consciousness, I could see. So part of this was a back and forth thing, because one of the things that I had done earlier in the experience, I was essentially like shape shifting. So I could just think of a raindrop and like be in the raindrop, or I could like think of a leaf and just be in the leaf. But it was showing me like how I can connect to anything like just with my thoughts. And so it was bringing that up. And then I also remember that at one point it was like I was on a boat, but it wasn't a boat. It was just me sort of being in this space and like kind of hovering and moving. But I could see Antarctica, and I could see the icebergs, and there was something in them. Didn't know why I was seeing this, didn't know anything about Antarctica at the time, and honestly didn't figure out what this meant until maybe a year ago. But I could see that there was life inside of it, and there was light, and there was stuff going on. But I just knew that that was significant, and I needed to remember it. But what I noticed when I was kind of going in between the spaces, and I didn't notice this until kind of the end. So when I was in the past, it was very dense, like it was thick. Like the way that it just looked dusty. Like I don't know another way to describe it, but it just looked very dense. Versus the things that I was seeing that were presently happening looked more realistic. Versus the things that I was seeing that happened in the future looked kind of misty. Not to be confused with dusty, but just like a little like translucent, almost like I could move it if I wanted to, but it was just different in the way that it presented. And so I was able to see things in the future, and it was showing me like that there was going to be a lot of destruction in the world, a lot of war, a lot of pain and suffering, but ultimately that it was pushing out something old and bringing in something new. And so I could see kind of what life was going to look like after all of that was over. But it was also showing me things in my future that were specific to me, but then also just, hey, you can see into the future. So at one point, the friend's mom, the friend who I had to watch what happened to her, me happen to her, I ended up meeting her mom in this space, which I did not know why this was significant because I had never met her mom in real life. But interestingly enough, the way that I saw her in my coma dream in 2014 was exactly how she looked when I initially met her 4 years later in 2018. And I didn't know this until after, meeting her. But when I saw her in my dream, she had a very specific haircut, very short, and it was cute. And again, I had no reason to think that that wasn't what she looked like, but I later found out that all her life she'd had long hair. She never cut her hair. And that was 2 weeks before I met her was when she cut her hair. And so when she told me that, I instantly knew that the purpose of me seeing that was to know that we can see into the future and that that's actually real. And I didn't believe in any of that stuff when I was having this experience. So I firmly believe that part of that was as simple as them just trying to tell me, you have these abilities, other people have these abilities, these are real. Like it's not a joke, it's not woo-woo, like it's a part of your spiritual being. So, and ironically, in 2018 was when I had another shift of awakening, of things happening, and it was like instant downloads after I met her. And so I almost wondered, like, was there something she had or she knew or something that connected us spiritually that I would even, see her in this realm? I don't know. But the point is that I was able to see things that hadn't happened yet. I was able to see things that were currently happening. And I was able to go and see things that happened in the past and where everything was and the outcome of that and just why and all of the things. So to wrap it all up, that's when I just was like, very much still like but why? And, I don't want to live like this. And I knew that I was sick. So I'm trying to tell spirit, I'm like, I don't want to go back. And I like tried to jump through the little mirror wall thing and it immediately snatched me back and was like, nope. And so then I woke up in my body and realized that it had been 37 days. I couldn't talk. I couldn't see. I woke up and was significantly blind. So I had a long road ahead of me, but 11 years later, I'm still here and I now have a better understanding of what that experience was and why I had to go through it. Um, but it was a lot to unpack after that because I could not unsee or unknow anything that I experienced during that experience. And so trying to make sense of religion and all of that was a struggle because I knew the truth and I knew that this whole entire space that I was in, I could just see like the little sparklies, like the love was just there. And I could see that this love was connected to this source. And in that was, and I could just see it like everywhere that I'm looking at anything in this space, I could see it through the mirror. I could see it when I was in that space. So I knew that it was all connected and I just needed to like figure out why. But it was a long journey to say the least. So that's the short version.
That's the short version.
The short version, yes.
And you did such a good job.
Thank you.
I remember the first time I heard your story, there were so many parts of it that stood out to me. And I was like, wow, like we go through, obviously everyone has a different experience, but then there are some things that are, I think, kind of consistent, right? With everyone.
Oh,
Like
yeah.
when you shared about realizing, when you're almost like shape-shifting, going into these different objects or whatever the case is, and realizing like we're all one,
Yes.
you know?
Like
Yeah.
completely. And it's only someone who truly has been in that can really understand what you mean, because it really is everything. Like
Yeah.
even the things that we don't like, even the things that are hard or difficult, like it's all connected.
How has it been like after your ND? It's cool because I know that many times like you've done other podcasts and stuff before and you've shared it, but it's different when you're being interviewed by someone who never had an NDE. So
Right.
there's all these, like the questions are usually a certain way, but
Yes.
because I've experienced it, that I want to ask you, some
Hmm.
questions, right? So for example, how has it been now that you're back? It's been 11 years, which is cool. For me, it's like this is just 1 year, right? Mine happened last year. So
Yeah.
everything is kind of really fresh for me. I don't think it ever is not fresh, but you just kind of learn
It's
to
not. Yeah. Because I mean,
exactly
even 11 years, I'm telling the story and it feels like it
like
was
it was
just
yesterday.
yesterday. Yeah. Like there's no separation, even
Exactly.
though it's been 11 years.
Yes,
But
yes. So how has it been going from being on the other side and like you feel like you're in truth, like whatever it is that you're experiencing, it's like, okay, I'm getting this realization that I am one with everything. Then you come back on this side and these years have passed. Have you been
mhm.
able to keep the purity of that realization, or has it been a struggle? Especially like
So,
you said, even things you don't like.
hmm
How
so it's interesting because I mentioned earlier that, I tried to still go back into church and all of those spaces around those people. And that was honestly the only time that it was difficult to maintain my knowledge. When I was just at home, in my space, or even just around the people in my life, it didn't feel hard to maintain. It only felt hard to maintain in spaces that were very fear driven, very hate convoluted. like it was hard to maintain it in that space only because you can't unsee the truth. Like I wanted to just let's forget about this happening to me and just move on, like go back. I tried my best to go back to normal, but there really wasn't a sense of normal because every time that I would encounter something, I almost would just intrinsically know like about it and why. And so there was a couple of situations that stood out that make me think of this, but particularly the first year. And it's interesting that you said you're in that space now, because that was a hard time for me dealing with the transition. So I thought I was going to go back to normal within a whole year. But when I got to the year anniversary, I was still learning how to walk. I was still, just really struggling with my health. But not only that, I hadn't talked about my spiritual experience. So the more that I ignored, like processing it, almost the louder it became when I saw and experienced certain things. So like I could not run from it. And so I kind of had a breakdown that first year, because I'm like, I can't exist like this. Like I can't unsee it. That's what I kept saying. I can't unsee it. So it was hard. But like I said, only when I tried to force myself to be in spaces that were not of love, to be frank. Like when I was in a healing space, I understood more. When I was in a fearful place, it was like almost like the physical nature of it would be louder. So I wasn't ever like experiencing visual hallucinations, but I could just see the energy around things. And it did get a little like a lot to deal with. So I backed away. I didn't really open anything spiritual up until around 2018, 2019 was when I was like, okay, I need to understand this. But once I started opening that door, it was like, oh, it's permanent now. Like I can't even move the door to try to think. No, I have to see things for how they are. And it is hard because, of course, the human side of me looks at trauma and pain and suffering as from a human perspective, like, no one deserves that. No one should go through that. But when I see it and I'm looking at it from the spiritual space, it's like, this is a part of the story. And that's really hard to accept, particularly when you're in the story. So like the hardest thing for me was that blindness was a part of my story. So from the time I woke up until 2021, I was losing my vision, like completely losing my vision to the point that it got to where I could only see like shapes and barely colors. I couldn't tell the difference between red and orange type things. And I'm struggling with this because I'm like, Spirit, you told me that I was like not gonna be blind. Like, what is going on? But they're telling me the whole time, this is a part of it. This is a part of it. But I couldn't see why. And that was very difficult for me to accept that this is a part of the refinement. This is a part of the growth. And I would not even understand it until after I was on the other side of the experience. But that absolutely was part of the journey. And that's what took me the longest time to integrate, was that sometimes the things that we don't like are still things that we need. And that's like the hardest thing to process.
Well said. Well said. And that was good in explaining that. What do you feel right now is the biggest thing that you I don't want to use the word struggle, but like what is it that you learned on the other side, or revelation you got from the other side, that you feel has been the hardest or most difficult to integrate?
um so I always hesitate when I say it like this, because it's still the human part of me, the Christian upbringing that's like, you can't say that.
Yeah.
But the most challenging, and I will say it's challenging to see, is that we are truly God. Like there is no separation between us, and whether you say God, source, spirit, whatever you call it, there is no separation. So we're constantly thinking that we're waiting on this thing outside of ourselves to come and save us, but really it's us that saves us. And so that has been challenging, because I've had to take almost like spiritual personal responsibility, which isn't bad, but like, again, being brought up in a Christian environment, thinking that I needed to pray to something outside of myself, and that if I'm suffering, it's a result of my own sin, and blah, blah, blah. Like all of that took a long time for me to change that and accept that I actually had more control than I thought I did, but not in the way that I think that I do. Yes. And it's just mentally challenging. I don't think it's physically challenging, because when I sit in that space and I know who I am and I revisit this experience and all the things, like I have so much peace and calm, but I think the human part of me that still like girl, you can't say that. You live in the South. You cannot say that you're God. Like, people aren't going to know what that means. But ultimately, I think it's the same thing that the story of Jesus was trying to say, that we are like Christ. You know, Christ was like the Father, and there is no separation. It's the Trinity. Like, all of that is true. It's just not true in the way that the patriarch and hate and all of that made it sound. But that was the hardest thing for me. And I knew that to be true, because when I'm there and I'm in that space and I can see everything that I'm thinking about is being brought, to my physical vision in this mirror, and it's reflecting to me, so I can see even everything that I'm experiencing is God itself. So it's like, how do I bring that back into my real life where I'm constantly surrounded by people that externalize things? And I want to say another challenging thing has been that I am enough. Like, our whole society teaches us that we need, to externalize our faith, that we need a partner, we need these things, we need a job, we need all these things to define who we are. And my life has forced me to not have any of that and see and love myself exactly as I am, without a title, without a spouse, without, any of these things. And it's like, I've had to redefine what success and love and beauty looks like for me. But doing so when there's still the external messaging of society is a huge challenge, because of course the human part of me wants all of those things, but I knew that there was so much loud messaging about needing to fully heal and needing to deal with my inner child wounds and all that stuff before I was ever going to be ready for the life I was meant to live. There was such a strong message about that. And knowing that we're meant to heal. Like, it's not just distract yourself with work and pull your bootstraps up and just keep going. Like, no, we're meant to be evolving human beings constantly. And staying committed to that in a world that does not make space for healing has been challenging. But I've also seen the benefits of it. I've seen the benefits of how my life changes drastically when I do my spiritual assignments, when I know that spirit is calling me to do something, whether that's speak, whether that's help someone, whether it's go into isolation, you need rest, no more, whatever it is. And I listen, I see the benefits of that, but it's contrary to, what we're supposed to do in the world. So that's probably the most challenging part, maintaining the knowledge of who I am, who you are, who we all are, knowing that it's so obvious and clear, yet still there's a lot of disconnect in the world from that truth. But knowing that it's okay for that to be private, and it's okay for that to be personal, and everybody's not meant to wake up, everybody's not meant to do the same thing that I'm doing, and that's okay. So, but it's hard sometimes.
Yeah, I love it. I love the honest answer, because it is, yes, this world is very much giving you so much duality and so many different, it's like mirrors and mirrors and mirrors, right? And then some mirrors distorted. So then it
goes. Some mirrors are shattered and cracked and you can't see, so.
Exactly. So I want to know, I remember one time when I heard you say, when you experienced the boss, the manager.
The manager, yeah.
Person in charge, right? The person in charge in your NDE. How do you reconcile knowing that there is someone in charge who we could call God or Most High or whatever? Knowing, because I experienced something like we talked about this before, similar, when I was like, I know that the person who controls everything, I know the presence, and I would call that presence God, right? So it is something like when you're on the other realm, in the other side, as much as you are aware that you're connected to all and that there is no separation between you and God, there's also a knowing that there is someone in charge. Yes. And that someone in charge is who you would call God, but then there's no separation with you and that person, yet you can feel your individualness, right? Yes. How do you, how has that experience maybe changed? You talked a little bit about it, so I'm just asking a little bit more to get in there. How has that experience, what does it look like now that you're here, back in your body and you're living life, right? What does your spiritual walk look like after having that revelation?
It looks a lot like
So like
really
like
focusing.
how do you pray is what I would say. Like how do you pray or meditate? Like what has changed? Like before maybe you prayed to like this outside God, right? So
Yeah.
what does that look like now for you?
So interestingly enough, I feel like the way that I pray hasn't changed that much. I think the angle in which I'm praying from has changed, but not how I talk to God. Like how I talk to God before is the same as I do now. I'll be like, listen, what you doing with your kids? What is going on? Come get your kids. But I will say I no longer, when I used to pray before, it was this like, God, please help me. God, please save me. God, fix this. God, do this. And now it's more of show me what I can do. Show me how. It's not even a why is this happening anymore. In the beginning, I was still asking the why questions, but now it's more of what am I supposed to do with this? What is the purpose of this? And when I approach it from that, I tend to get more clear answers. But when I'm just like, why did all this? Because I already know the why and they be reminding me, Khaliah, you already know why. But that part is the same and also changed. So I hope that answers that.
Yep.
In terms of what does my spiritual life look like? So I still growing up in church, Sundays was always a big day. So that's still a day for me. I tend to do lots of kind of self-care, my spiritual practices, all the things on Sunday. And I really do look at it as just a day for me to rest with God, rest with me. So I do a lot of self-care stuff, but I try not to do as much of like other people. Like, that's what kind of the other days are for, which I still do a lot of stuff, but um also just mind, body, spirit connection. That is something that I really put into practice because of course, we're aware of how to take care of our bodies, nutrition and exercise and all of those things, but I really learned about the connecting of all three. And it's almost that message of the Trinity, like God, Father, Holy Spirit. It's the same in us. So our physical body is like, Jesus. Our mind is like, God, and our spirit is like the Holy Spirit. So when I approach things in my life now, I'm almost looking at it from that perspective. So when I feel a disconnection from myself, or if I'm just feeling energetically weighed down, I tend to try to get back into my body because that's a message that something is disconnecting me, on one of those layers. So just really seeing my physical body and my mind and my spirit as just that three separate things that are all connected that need tuning and work to reconnect, maintenance type stuff. But I do a lot of somatic therapy. I do a lot of sound healing. I really paid attention to what is the church doing? What do we all typically associate with church? There's music or some type of sound element. There's prayer. There's, sometimes there's fasting. Sometimes, so I try to incorporate all of those things, but just into my personal practice. So if spirit is calling me to fast, I do that. If spirit is saying, hey, you need to go replenish your body. And sometimes I'll do, juice things where all I do is plants for a day, but there's no constraint and there's no restrictions. There's not, this is the right way and this is the wrong way. It's about what do I need in this moment? And sometimes it's more about my body. Sometimes it's more about my mind, but sometimes it's the spirit stuff. So combining different practices is really what works best for me. And prayer is still the same, but it also kind of incorporates meditation almost. And I'm sort of just, I have the visual of what I experienced in my near death experience. And so I frequently will just sort of bring that image to my mind. And that's kind of how I go talk to God, kind of thing. But with the understanding that I don't have to wait for that thing to do it for me. It's that I'm going there to get the clarity to see what I need to do down here. But once I know, it's still me that has to go and do something. So there's never this, God, why aren't you saving me anymore? It's just more of like, okay, what am I supposed to do with this? How do I get here? And then I just wait for the guidance. And once you start connecting your body to your mind again, I know for a lot of people that have trauma, we tend to dissociate a lot. So a lot of my work was about reconnecting body to mind, and that helped a lot in my spiritual practice too, because then my body was able to send me signals and messaging about certain things. And you are the controller. So I decided if I want you to send me a warning, this is what it looks like. If I want you to tell me that I'm doing right, then this is you kind of like program yourself basically. And it's as long as you are operating from the space of love and truth and light, then you're in control. Like you only veer off to that path when you choose to. So I tend to focus just on self, reconnection to self, and doing what I need and not necessarily committing to just one thing. It's not about there's only one way. It's about there's truth in everything. As long as what you're doing resonates on that truth and that love and that light frequency, then it's fair game. So I just operate in that space.
I love it. I love it. It's all about being, doing what's appropriate for you
Mm-hmm.
in the time, right? And learning how to, because even it's all about oneness, right? It's all about finding that oneness with spirit and
Yes.
being able to really listen to the guidance of spirit. So that's the first thing. If you're coming to, let's say, pray or meditate or whatever the case is, it's a spiritual thing. So you
Mm-hmm.
listen to your spirit. You have to be able to follow your intuition. I always tell people sometimes what you need to do, you need to dance. Sometimes you need to
Yes, sometimes it's as simple
sometimes
as that. Because essentially, what we're doing is like, everyone wants to think about meditation, but all meditation is doing is getting your physical body into a calm enough space to allow that inner space between your mind and your spirit to actually stillness to come through. But you can access that through anything, through dancing, painting, riding in the car, screaming at the
anything.
top of your lungs. There's anything as long as you're in that flow space, and everybody's flow space is different. So as long
And
as you
it
can get
varies
in that
from
in
day to
between
day.
space, you're good.
Yeah, and it varies from day to day. What worked for you today may not be what works for you tomorrow.
Exactly. Exactly. And that was also something that I had to accept that it was going to be different. My very rigid type A mind that needs, structure and planning and this and all that was like, things are going to change and that's okay. Like what worked for me 10 years ago isn't what I need right now. And what I needed right now, I wasn't even ready to do at that point. So it's accepting that it's okay to evolve. You don't have to do the same thing over and over and over again. That's not how you reach enlightenment. It really can be through multiple channels, multiple religions, multiple faiths, multiple not faith. It's just whatever your programming is. And we're all born with our own soul contract. So we're fulfilling different things, even though we're living the same life. So it's okay that your neighbor's experience looks different than yours. We're meant to co-collaborate, basically. Like, you learned something from my experience, I learned something from your experience, and now we have a different experience because of each other's different experience. So it really is okay. Just be on your own journey. Mind your business is really what they
Yes,
kept telling me.
literally,
Like,
literally.
focus
Or
on
like,
you, and it's okay.
or like a way it says it in the Bible is like, work out your salvation, work out
Mm-hmm.
your own salvation. And so the next question I have, and this will be the last question.
Yes, I know. I'm watching the time. I know you got to get to your babies.
The next question I have for you is based on everything you experienced in your before your NDE.
Mm-hmm.
So like your part one, what we talked about,
Mm-hmm.
and also your NDE, and 11 years after, right? Having experienced it all and being able to sit back and, just take it all in, right? If you can give, like, say this was your last message, your last thing, your last like 1 minute, what can I say to help someone out there who may be watching this love story? What would you tell them?
I would absolutely, this is a no-brainer. You have to heal yourself. You cannot reach outside of yourself for anything. Everything that we need is truly within every single one of us, and we just have to give ourselves permission to access it. And there is no skipping. You have to heal the stuff that you're meant to heal. Now, again, that doesn't mean that everybody's meant to have this huge evolved experience like people that have NDEs, but we're all meant to heal the things that we've gone through, and we're meant to reconnect our body, our mind, and our spirit. That is the way to do just about anything, whether it's health, whether it's prosperity, success. You have to go back to who you were before the world told you who you were. Yes, and you have to restore that in order to be your greatest self in this life. And it truly starts with seeing that you are just the universe experiencing itself. and you tell it what to do, which is hard to accept. But when you actually sit with it and you understand the principles and you understand the underlying purpose of all of this, it's actually very freeing. It's not scary at all. It's actually comforting to know that I don't have to wait for something else outside of me to decide that I'm worthy. I just inherently am. And by my expression of that in my mind is sending out the messages to give me the things that I deserve because of understanding that inherent worthiness. So don't look outside of yourself, look within truly and heal your stuff, heal your inner child. That's the message.
Like some people say, do the work.
Do the work. Yes, you have to. Like, but it's worth it. It's hard and it's not pretty, especially if you've been through a lot of trauma, but it is absolutely worth it. And it's going to give you the access to your growth and to your abundance and to your birthrights, to all of those things once you're connected again. So do it.
Sis, wonderfully said. Wonderfully said.
Thank
You said it better. Goodness said it better.
Thank you, thank you, thank you.
It has been a joy, like always, to have you on. I know that you share gems and nuggets, you share it all. And, I would think that we'll see, what comments people make and what, if anything else, they want to know more about. So you've shared, like I said, in part one, you shared a bunch of stuff and you've just shared some more. So we'll see, I think, depending on what else you may think you need to share or what people are asking for. But I think in part three, might be something that we definitely do. I think even I have some more questions I would like to,
Yes.
that.
And I would love for us to be able to just kind of go back and forth and share, like how we were talking about our experiences, and maybe there's something we could talk about just from both two people, having a similar experience. So
you know what? Maybe that's what we could do part three about, like looking at what people ask and combining it all together and just having like a in conclusion, here's what we've experienced and here's what we've learned from it, and bam, right?
Damn, I love it. I love it. I love it. I love it. Thank you so much. And I just appreciate the opportunity. Every time I have an opportunity to share about this, I love it. And I'm just so grateful for you. So thank you.
Thank you. So for anyone watching, much blessings to you. Thank you for listening to Sister's story. And we hope that you will tune in for part three because it's happening. It's happening. And leave your comments, leave your questions that you have either for myself or for Khaliah, and we will make sure to answer it in our next love story. If you would like to be a part of Love Story, if you'd have maybe an NDE or you have any kind of spiritual experience or just experiencing life, which is a very spiritual experience, any way that you want to share how love has saved you from the darkness of this reality, this world that we're all experiencing, this time frame, please let us know. You could comment below or you could send me an email at lovestory4yandea@gmail.com. And I look forward to hearing from you and seeing you next Sunday at 7:30. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.